Hello and welcome to Newsbreakers here on FiOS1 News. I'm Andrew Whitman. It is, of course, budget time in Westchester County, and for the past few weeks we've been focusing on the first budget proposal from County Executive George Latimer. Quick reminder, it's a $1.9 billion budget, and the headline you probably know is that it comes with a 2% tax increase. The budget again has to cope with a deficit, $39 million, offset in part by tapping into the county's reserve fund. Now, add that deficit to last year's $32 million deficit, and the reserve fund is now down to just $71 million. The shrinking of the reserve fund, one of the major reasons that two of the three top credit agencies downgraded the county's rating this week. Finally, the controversies. The county is borrowing or plans to borrow more than $8 million for property tax readjustments. And there are somewhat controversial plans to sell the county center's parking lots to a development corporation for $22 million. We have heard from Mr. Latimer on this program. This week, we turn to the top Republican on the County Board of Legislators as we welcome in Minority Leader John Testa. Mr. Minority Leader, welcome back to Newsbreakers.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Let's start first with the credit rating downgrade.
Sure.
Your response to that, as well as to the county executive's claim, well, this was expected and we think we can recover this within a certain amount of time.
Well, first of all, the credit rating reduction is related directly to two things only. That's the $30 million, roughly $30 million that was used to settle the CSEA contract, which happened right before the budget was presented. So it's not looked at as a budgetary item, but it really affected the budget, obviously, because of that reduction of $30 million out of the reserves. And then, of course, the sale of the property that you mentioned, the parking lots at County Center, according to Bloomberg, was the other reason that we were downgraded. So those are the two reasons why we were downgraded.
And is there criticism in your voice for Mr. Latimer for doing that, or?
Well, first of all, I understand the position he's in. It's always tough to come in and create a budget for the county of Westchester, almost a $2 billion budget. And but I just think back a year ago and 2 years ago and 3 years ago, all the rhetoric of my friends on the other side of the aisle of all the things that shouldn't be done. And they're not only doing the same thing, but doubling down on much of that. So it's kind of an irony, a sad irony in some respects, but it is the reality we have to work through.
You, of course, are the top Republican on the county legislature. You were an advocate of former county executive Rob Astorino. Mr. Latimer has laid much of the blame, or tried to, on the Astorino administration and their budgeting and refusal to raise property taxes, that sort of thing. What's your response to that?
Well, obviously, you always have to build a multi-year plan, which is what the Astorino administration was trying to do, which is why we had the big three, as I call them. We had the plan for the North 60 project, which had to move forward. We had the airport, which is the biggest of the three, and then, of course, Playland. Those three issues were being settled in a way that would have been a positive revenue, less expense for the county, that was going to take a number of years to put in place. All there ready to go, and here we are in December, a year later, and nothing has been done on any of those three things.
Now, the County Executive Latimer has made plain his distaste for those projects, or at least the resolution of those projects, as Mr. Astorino had hoped that they would be done. Then we come to the County Center parking lot, which you mentioned when it comes to the credit rating downgrade, but there is also some questions as to the legality and the propriety of that. However, if you're a supporter of privatizing the airport and Playland and these other deals that seem to be one-shots that give revenue to the county under the Astorino administration, isn't this the same thing? Isn't he's selling a piece of county property for money to offset some budget issues?
Actually, the airport isn't a privatization deal. It's a partnership. Right now, it's privatized because there's no county employees at the airport as we speak, and they are.
And I'm sorry to cut you off, but Mr. Latimer has claimed that it's essentially the same thing with the County Center parking lot because it's a public development corporation that would be selling it to.
Well, I'm explaining that it's not the same
Because
the airport, yes, you get one shot of $15 or $20 million as it was originally proposed, but then you would have a reoccurring revenue each year going forward for 30 years. This is just a one shot that never has a revenue source going forward. So it's a one and done. There's nothing in the future to it. And some of the concerns we have, and first of all, I have to give credit where credit is due. Whoever came up with this plan, obviously you're always looking for thinking outside the box, getting new revenue that hasn't been realized before, which is something we always have to look at. It's just that it's being done without real oversight, and we're not really getting any of our questions answered that we've been trying to get since about a week or so that we've learned about this plan.
You remind me of an interesting point, that when this was first proposed, the sale of the county center parking lot, that certainly caught me off guard. I had no indication. Really, even the members of the board,
Yes,
there was no.
absolutely. Nobody knew about it. Even the county attorney said he didn't realize when the budget was presented that this was in there. He was not consulted beforehand. So he had to do, and he did yeoman's work, he and his staff doing research on the laws that they're using to justify this going forward. So yeah, so we're all still kind of learning. It's still a work in progress, as you may say, but we're trying to get to all the questions answered that we need to have answered. The problem is I don't think they're going to be able to answer them before we vote on the budget, which is the problematic part of the whole thing.
Republicans have a rather small minority on the Board of Legislators after last year's elections. So if the legislature is going to somehow impede or otherwise alter this deal, you're going to need some help from across the aisle from some Democrats. Have you taken their temperature? Do you have a sense of where your colleagues on the other side of the aisle are?
Well, first of all, our goal is not to impede anything. Our goal is to have a balanced budget that we can all live with. And that's really what we come from each and every year. So we're not going into the budget process looking for ways to impede or to stop or to complicate it. This is something that was last minute that we're just trying to get answers to, because this has implications far beyond the parking lots at County Center. If this goes through and the law that they're stating from 1961 is accurate, that nobody seemed to know about until recently, that means every county park throughout Westchester County can now have part of it sold off based on whether we need it or not. They're saying we don't need a parking lot as part of a park. You go to any park throughout Westchester County, you have to go through the entry gates to that park, and there's a parking lot there for you to park so you can enjoy the open space, or in this case, the county center. So what happens to the rest of the county parks? There's one thing I can tell you we definitely don't need, and that's an amusement park. We can make that argument that Westchester County doesn't need an amusement park. So does that mean in the future we can just say, you know what, we don't have to go to the state legislature, they're out of the picture, we can just close up Playland Park and sell it?
There will be oversight hurdles for this budget proposal all the way through the county legislature, and if the park deal goes through, Albany has to get involved. White Plains might have to get involved. The city.
Well, that's the questions we're trying to get to the bottom of. According to the administration, the state is not needed with the process they have unfolded with the law that they claim is in place. Neither does the White Plains, based on the reason why they're saying that the property is not needed. So these are the nuances we're trying to work through.
So what's the worst case scenario here? Let's say the budget passes with the sale of the county parking lot in there, and then for one reason or another it gets invalidated at some point down the road, or the county is blocked from completing that transaction. You have a $22 million hole in the budget, but other than that, is there a negative?
Well, first of all, I guarantee you the budget's going to pass with this in it. So that's not even a question. They have the votes, and from all indications, they're going to allow that to take place. So it'll be mainly a $20 million hole, because $2.5 million a year is realized in revenue from those parking lots. Okay. So it's not the full 22 that'll be reduced. That's just splitting hairs a bit, but it is, the number. So if that's included, and for some reason that the law is not upheld that they're counting on for the sale, then we have a problem, and which is why I'm calling for a Plan B, the same way that my friends on the board called for Astorino to have a Plan B on some of his initiatives in case it does not happen. How are we going to fill that budget hole, say, a year from now?
And was a Plan B conceived? Was a Plan
Yes.
B? So
yes, there was always a Plan B, and Plan B in a worst case scenario was borrowing or using the fund balance. But as you mentioned at the beginning of the program, that option may not be there anymore because of what was done already.
But the irony there is that that Plan B needed to be relied on the final two budgets that Rob Astorino put forward, because he had chunks of the budget as revenue from the sale or from the contract for the airport, which never materialized. So each of the final 2 years of his budget.
Right, exactly.
So wouldn't this be essentially the same thing?
I agree. I think it would be exactly the same thing. And when you vote on a budget, whether you vote yay or nay, but if you vote to support a budget that has such revenue in it, you have to know and you have to let the public know that it's a balanced budget, and then there is a way to make it a balanced budget if for some reason something does not happen as you have planned. So it's disingenuous to vote yes on a budget with this scenario and complain about previous budgets.
One of the other questions that I've heard people lob at the budget proposal from Mr. Latimer is the borrowing to pay off the tax certiorari, which I hope I've described it properly,
Yes.
as adjustments to property taxes and things like that. Mr. Latimer and other Democrats had complained viscerally when Mr. Astorino borrowed money to pay pension obligations.
Which was also in the budget, by the way.
Understood.
$5.5 million on top of the $8.5.
It's the continued interest on the outstanding debt. Is that correct from the?
Not the way it was explained to
Okay.
me, but that may be. So it's for paying for pensions. That's all I know.
Right. Okay. So is the county's borrowing for the property taxes, the tax certioraries, problematic for you, given that the county borrowed when it came to pension obligations?
We've done it in the past, but not to this extent. We've done it in smaller increments, and we've done it as a placeholder, knowing that there was other revenues that, and in a few cases, it didn't end up being used. Even though it's in the budget, it was never, you have to vote on it as a separate item to do that, and it was never used. So it was there, again, to make the integrity of the budget there for when you vote on it. So the plan was never to use it or not use it in full. In this case, the revenue sources that were contemplated have not been acted on, as I said, in the last year. So I don't know if there would be a replacement if that was not used.
When I asked the county executive about those two more controversial planks in the budget, the borrowing for the certioraries as well as the sale of the county center parking lot, and why he would do that after complaining about it or things like that, he basically said, well, it was either this or we'd have to go beyond a 2% property tax increase. I'm curious for your response to that as his answer.
Well, I know there are members of my board, at least a few, that would vote for a higher property tax increase because they believe that's the way to go. In the past, the things that were done with the budget were done to save tax increases at all. Obviously, as you know, it was 0%. So our goal was always to keep taxes lower, which we still believe is the way to go, whether you can get it to a 0 or not. So I agree with the county executive of trying to keep taxes low. It's just a matter of having an integrity of a budget that we can all feel comfortable with going forward.
I know you and the other Republicans on the board have a philosophical disagreement with the county executive and the other Democrats about taxes. You always want taxes as low as possible. As you said, there are some people who think that property taxes should be higher. I'm curious, do you think that Mr. Latimer has in any way violated his own philosophy on this by agreeing to things that he was complaining about under the previous administration?
Well, I just think that getting into a position you run for, and he knows this, he's been in politics a long time. He's a great guy. I know him for a number of years before I was involved with the county board, and he has his heart in the right place. It's just that when you get into these positions and you have to actually do, it's easy to bark from the outside, but once you're in there and you have to actually do it, you find out what it takes. Sometimes, be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah, that's true. Everybody thinks the work is over after Election Day, and it's really just beginning. So Mr. Latimer had told me that he's hoping this will be short-lived, that those other techniques won't be necessary in future years, that between the added revenue coming from the property tax increase as well as sales taxes, which seem to be doing better than they had been in previous years, that will help buoy the bottom line for the county. Do you share that optimism? Do you think that's the path we're on?
Well, the sales tax issue is something that fluctuates so greatly. You really can't rely on it. You can rely on it from year to year sometimes, but as a long-term strategy, that doesn't seem to work, obviously. And so, like I said earlier, the real revenue streams that could be new have not even been looked at for the last year. So I'm concerned about eventually getting that revenue online. So what might have been something we could have realized this year may now be either stopped completely or many years down the road. I know there is some talk about going to the state to have the sales tax number raised, the percentage raised to a point where it would bring a significant more revenue to the county. But with the state, you never know how they're going to vote on things, especially now that they're being ripped out of the park alienation process, which I'm sure Losing that ability is not sitting well with them, and especially the one law that is on the books in Westchester County, that if parkland is taken off the county rolls, that the municipality that it lies in has the opportunity to get that property for $1. And they're saying that that's not taking place now. So White Plains is going to have something to say, I would think, about this plan as well.
Before I let you go, I want to go back to something we mentioned earlier in the interview. You talked about the CSEA contract, that's the contract for public
Yes.
workers for the county, as impacting the credit rating downgrade. I'm curious your take on the county's deal with the CSEA and whether you think it was well handled or too expensive. I mean, the CSEA workers went, what, 6-7 years without a contract?
Full disclosure, I'm a union member as a former teacher, been a union member for 40 years, so I think I'm the only union member on the county board. So I understand not having a contract for a number of years, what that means for your family and for planning and all that. And it was always hinged on the health contributions, and this could have been settled 7 years ago if that issue was settled. And actually, from what I've been told, based on the numbers, that the contract that was settled on recently was not as good as the one they could have had under Astorino 3 years ago. So this could have been settled a number of years ago, but for whatever reason, you know, politics gets in the way of good ideas, unfortunately, sometimes.
Okay, but I'm sorry, but do you feel like it was handled the right way? Do you feel like the outcome was in the best possible outcome for the county and for the CSEA workers? Do you have any problems with that deal?
No, I mean, it had to be settled, and they deserve to have a contract settled. I'm not negating that. It's just a matter of the negotiation, and I know some of the union members were not happy with going back 7 years. There's retroactive component, pay component to these contracts, and getting 0% in the first couple of years did not sit well with some of them. But as years and years go on, the value of the contribution toward health insurance versus the increase in pay sometimes negates the need to rush into a settlement, which I think what took place.
And if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, that was the final outstanding labor contract that the county had?
Yes.
So.
Well, now new one. Now it'll start.
Well, it starts over. It starts over again. The clock is always ticking.
Yes,
sure,
yeah.
but at least for now, it's those expenses
and it's
have
the
been
largest.
taken care of.
It's the largest
Right.
Group of individuals, obviously.
And I would think that would be promising for trying to improve the financial future of the county. Just because now you at least have some floor, you know, these are what our expenses are. This deal is done.
Well, what triggers, the important thing it triggers, and I think it's built into this budget to the credit of the administration, is a lot of the workers who were eligible for retirement were waiting for this contract to be settled before they could make their retirement plans. So now that this contract is settled, from what we understand, there's over 100 to 150 individuals looking to now enter the retirement world. So those numbers are a big savings, and until we know that exactly, we'll know which ones need to be filled. Maybe some can be held empty for part of the year or permanently. So those numbers add into it as well.
That word retirement, it sounds so nice. I have no idea what it means.
Someday you will.
I'm not at this rate. I'm not sure. Finally, I guess any other questions or concerns that you have for the budget process, or the financial condition of the county?
Well, we're just looking to have our questions answered, very basic questions answered. Like I said, we're not looking.
Do you feel like they're not being?
Not on, especially not on the parking lot issue. I mean, we can't have details after the fact of voting.
So what would you like to see the ninth floor do?
The LDC met this morning, and they have concerns as well. I just would like to have our questions answered between now and a week from tomorrow when the budget is voted on. We are almost at the end of our review. Department by department review ends tomorrow. Monday we gather and we start the negotiation process as the Board of Legislators. The county executive is basically, his part has been fulfilled. Now it's up to us to come up with a final budget that he can either support or not support. And I predict they'll come up with something.
So what would you like to see Mr. Latimer do? Would you like them to come down from the 9th floor to the 8th and answer whatever questions you have? Or?
It's not Mr. Latimer at all, actually.
Okay.
It's the legal questions that we have, and really how this process is going to play out going forward. we realize he's doing the best he can in terms of what he feels he needs to do to balance the budget. We just want to make sure that it's something that's real, that can be counted on. I would love to have conversations with him going forward on the airport, on Playland, and on the North 60 project, which are the 3 projects I think are the future solvency for the county.
John Testa is the county legislator from District 1. He is also the Republican minority leader on the board. Have a great holiday season. Thanks so much.
Too.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.